courgettes, but James, if you do the countdown when you're ready, I'll confirm when it's live because it has to switch on here. Thank you.
Two, one, go.
Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to this Planning Committee meeting hosted by Bassetlaw District Council. I should explain that emergency legislation passed back in March enabled councils to hold meetings such as this on a virtual basis, and it exempts us from being present in the council chamber to take decisions. This, of course, is a public meeting and we welcome members of the public, and we hope that the connection remains strong throughout the meeting. If, though, we lose it, there is someone who's monitoring that, and we will adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to re-establish connection. Hitherto, the connections have been pretty good, pretty reliable. It is a public meeting, but I should explain that members of the public cannot contribute, only those who have asked to in advance. And tonight we have 2 members of the public plus a councillor who will be speaking on the Rhodesia application in due course. But before we get to that, there's some business to conduct, first of which is to find out who's actually in the meeting tonight. So I will go round in alphabetical order to ascertain that the councillors are in contact with the meeting. So Councillor Brand, are you present?
Yes, I'm present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Charlesworth.
Yes, I'm present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Oxby.
Yes, Chairman, thank you.
Good evening. Councillor Quigley.
Present.
Good evening. Good. Councillor Richardson.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
Present, Chair.
Good. Councillor Tomlinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm present. Thank you.
Good evening. And myself. So that means there are 11 members present tonight, and it will be us who will vote on the Rhodesia application in due course. We also have a number of officers in attendance, so I need to check that they're connected. First of all, the committee clerk, Ms. Hopkinson.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. The facilitator for tonight, Mr. Lavender.
Present, Chair.
And the development team manager, Mr. Krozak.
I'm present, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And the council solicitor, Mr. Wormold.
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you. I should explain that the last 2 officers will give us advice and any guidance that we require on the application to help us make our decision. Should explain that we also have Ms. Beverly Alderson-Sambrook, who is the team's caster, and it's her job, along with Mr. Lavender's, to make sure that the technology works this evening. Thank you. So we move on to the first agenda item, which is apologies. Do we have apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Challoner.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is to receive declarations of interest by members and officers.
There's none received, Chair.
Thank you. And there's no one wanting to make a last minute declaration. Okay, good. Agenda item number 3 is minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June this year, the minutes of which are on page 5 to 11 of the agenda. I will move round members in alphabetical order again to determine if you are in favour, against or abstain that these represent an accurate record. Councillor Brand.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Charlesworth.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Freeman.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Oxby.
In favour, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Quigley.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. And so am I. So those are accepted as a true record and they will be signed in due course. Agenda item number 4 is minutes of planning consultation group meetings held between the 15th and the 29th of June. For the benefit of the public, that this is a subcommittee of our main committee and we consider more minor applications of that. The minutes are there and they are provided for information. Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is the outstanding minutes list, page 23 of our agenda. And there are 2 actions there which will be actioned in due course. Thank you. Agenda item number 6A is the public interest test. As Beverley Alderson Sambrook, Head of Regeneration, has deemed that all the reports on the agenda tonight are not confidential. And the first one then is agenda item number 6B, which are appeal decisions received recently. And we've had 1 appeal, and that is reported on pages 25 to 28. And I'd like to invite the Planning Development Manager to give a summary of this finding. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This was an appeal in respect of a dwelling. It was a retrospective application. Planning permission had been previously granted for a single-storey dwelling on a very constrained site on land adjacent to 33 Clinton Street in Worksop. The planning enforcement team received concerns from neighbouring occupiers that a dwelling had been constructed that wasn't in accordance with the approved plans. On visiting the site, the enforcement team found that a dwelling of a scale of 1.5 stories had been constructed on a larger footprint and on a different position within the site. The developer subsequently made a retrospective planning application to retain the dwelling as built, that officers had concerns regarding the scale of the dwelling and its impact upon neighbouring occupiers, particularly in terms of overlooking and overshadowing. The planning inspectorate did agree with the officer's decision and subsequently dismissed the appeal. An enforcement notice has been served also to demolish that dwelling, and we are currently waiting the outcome of the appeal on that enforcement notice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Does any member wish to make any comment or ask any questions on this appeal decision? No. Okay, thank you.
Yes. I've got my
Councillor,
hand,
yeah.
Please
got my
do.
hand up.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, could I ask a question? How long are these people given to demolish the dwelling that shouldn't be there? How long have they got to complete it in?
We've prescribed a period ourselves on the notice of 4 months. We felt that was reasonable given that the dwelling isn't completed or occupied. So we prescribed 4 months, but should the inspector decide to also dismiss that appeal and uphold our notice, they can vary the notice to allow a longer period if necessary.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I don't think anyone else wishes to speak, so we will move on then to the one application tonight, and this is an application for full planning permission for a residential development of 127 2, 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, ancillary works and the construction of a new access. This in fact is a resubmission of application 19/00852, which we determined in April of this year. And this is on land west of Queen Elizabeth Crescent, Rhodesia. And the report can be found starting on pages 29 and following. And I'd invite Mr. Krozak, please, to introduce this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Full planning permission is proposed for the erection of 127 dwellings on land to the south and to the west of Queen Elizabeth Crescent in Rhodesia. This is a resubmission of an application that was previously refused by Planning Committee in April 2020 on the grounds of off-site highway safety impacts and the impact upon education provision. The precise reasons for the refusal are outlined on page 34 of the report. The site is open agricultural land and can be accessed from Cecil Close and Mary Street, which are linked by Queen Elizabeth Crescent. The area to the north of the site is characterised by late 20th century housing, which has been built along a network of interconnected streets. This slide shows the application site, which is obviously outlined within red. To the south of the site is the Lady Lee Quarry Local Wildlife Site, and to the east is the High Grounds Wood Local Wildlife Site. To the north of the site lies the Hagenfield Primary School. This slide shows how it's proposed to develop the site and lay the site out. The application is almost identical to that which was previously refused permission, save for the creation of a turning head in the southeast corner of the site and the provision of an additional footpath link to the adjacent bridleway to the west. Access is proposed to be taken from Cecil Close, with a highway through the development being made up to terminate directly to the south of Mary Street. The developer has agreed to provide a commuted sum to make up an adoptable roadway link to the development, from the development to Mary Street. It's proposed to provide an area of landscaping which wraps around the west through to the southeastern corner of the site, together with balancing ponds for the SUDS drainage for the scheme. This slide shows a typical 2-bedroom property that's proposed. This is an example of a 3-bedroom property proposed, and this is one of the 4-bedroom house types. Just having a look at the site characteristics, this photograph was taken looking in northerly direction towards Mary Street. So the application site here lies on the left-hand side of the photograph. The view looking southwest from Cecil Street up towards the site. This is the location of the proposed access from Cecil Street. View looking east, with the nature reserve being behind the bank of trees on the right hand side of the picture. So the site is largely on the left hand side. This view is looking towards the boundary of the site and the dwellings of Queen Elizabeth Crescent. This photograph is taken within the Lady Lee Nature Reserve site itself. This picture is taken from the public footpath and looks east towards the edge of a nature reserve, with the application site being to the left of the tree belt. So moving on to the report, consultee comments are summarised on pages 35 and 37, and it should be noted that none of the council statutory consultees have objected to the scheme. 11 letters of objection have been received, along with a petition containing 80 signatures, and the matters raised are set out on pages 37 and 38 of the report. A local member of the area has also objected to the scheme, and the comments that he makes are outlined on page 37 of the report. Following the publication of the agenda, the Diocese of Southwell and Nottingham Academy Trust have raised concerns regarding the County Council's decision not to request any contributions toward education provision, as contributions have been requested from other developments, including Tilden Road and the former Dormitool site. The Trust states that the County Council have not engaged with them, and work is still ongoing to determine the capacity of Hagenfield School. The classrooms within the school are a substandard size, and the toilet facilities also do not comply with the Department for Education guidance, and improvements are required. Turning to the issues, the report makes it clear that the scheme has to be considered under the planning balance test as contained in paragraph 11 of the NPPF, as the Council's adopted core strategy policies are now considered to be out of date. This means that the development should be considered under the planning balance and should be approved unless the harm arising from the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh its benefits. The report identifies that the delivery of 127 dwellings on the site will help to build a strong, responsive and competitive economy in the district, and will help to deliver the growth envisaged in policy CS2 of the core strategy. The application was previously refused due to concerns regarding the off-site impact of the development on the highway network and the local primary school having insufficient capacity to accommodate the pupils generated by the development. The applicant has submitted a transport statement that assesses the impact of certain junctions, and the scope of this assessment has been agreed with the Highway Authority. The assessment concludes that the A57 Sandy Lane High Grounds roundabout will operate over capacity in 2024 in the peak PM hour only, and that is with or without this development, and the development proposed would have a minimal impact upon the operation of this roundabout. Nottinghamshire County Council Strategic Highways and Highways Development Control have not raised any objection to the development and have stated that the necessary road infrastructure improvements required to mitigate the cumulative traffic impact would be funded by silver receipts. Nottinghamshire County Council, as the local education authority, have commented that they consider there is a projected surplus of places within the primary planning area, and there is no requirement for a contribution toward primary education improvements. As stated, the Trust who manage Hagenfield School have raised concerns that there is some confusion over the capacity of the school, and documentation states this could either be 135 or 175 places, with the current roll of pupils being 101. In terms of the design, layout and visual amenity and landscape character, it's considered that the proposal would be viewed in the context of a development to its north and east, with landscaping along the border of the site to soften its impact upon the surrounding countryside. In terms of ecology, it must be noted that there are two sites of ecological importance in the vicinity of the application site. Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust have been consulted on the scheme, and they have advised that they consider the development of the site with housing will have a positive impact on the Lady Lee Nature Reserve, as the surface water from the housing can be diverted through a suitable, sustainable urban drainage system into the nature reserve to resolve current management issues which are caused by the site drying out during certain parts of the year. The council's consultees have identified the infrastructure improvements that will be required to make this scheme acceptable in planning terms. The requirements are listed on page 45 of the report, and it must be noted that the commuted sum requirements amount to approximately £175,000. Therefore, having considered the benefits as outlined on pages 46 and 47 of the report, this scheme is recommended for approval subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and the imposition of the conditions outlined from page 47 onwards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I understand that there aren't any questions that were submitted pre-meeting. Is that right?
That's correct, Chairman.
Yeah. Okay, so we can move straight on then to the speakers for this evening, of which there are 3. Speakers can either address the meeting in person or they can issue a written statement which is read out on their behalf. And Mr. Short, who's an objector of the scheme, has chosen for his contribution to be read out. And this will be read out by Mr. Krozak. So when you're ready, sir.
Just for members' information, in Mr. Short's statement, he does refer to photographs. That is contrary to our guidance that is published on the website for public speaking during the planning committee meeting, and the protocol does clearly state that speakers will not be allowed to circulate or introduce written material or photographs. So whilst I may refer to photographs during the statement, obviously they can't be presented to yourselves. So just to commence the statement, the minor changes in this application by Gleeson's are obviously there to allow for a resubmission. The reality is that nothing has changed with regards to the reasons for the application's refusal by the planning committee at the meeting held on the 1st of April. Whilst Gleeson's hold great emphasis on traffic movements at the A57 roundabout and having no major objections from county highways, again, one would assume the traffic generated figures for this development would have been submitted in isolation and not as a compounded problem associated with all the other combined developments both in and adjacent to the village. The main issue, which is still to be addressed and totally ignored by Gleeson's, is the huge increase in traffic on one entrance road into the village itself and over the small village streets, not main roads. Having already demonstrated the true volume of all traffic from the village's combined developments and the reality of access via Cecil Close in my original objection, I would also draw your attention to Tilden Road, which is the main access road going in and out of our village. Whilst the entrance exit onto the Shire Oaks Workshop Road has been recorded, there is little by way of fact regarding its continuation onto Streetley Lane at the western end of the village. This country lane is practically a single track road with a 3-ton weight limit, single lane humpback bridge. On entry to the village, there is a height restricted railway bridge on a blind bend that prevents lorries or delivery traffic entering the same. This is the only viable way out of the village when the main road is closed due to a traffic accident, or as in the recent past when it was closed over a week due to fires at the recycling centre. And is a further reason to refuse this development on both the level of traffic and safety concerns associated with it. Again, I would reiterate the point that housing stock is not needed, and all of the new developments within a mile or two of our village have the infrastructure put in place first, by way of new roundabouts to main carriageways, new service requirements before building has taken place, and none of it has taken place over small village roads or streets. I enclose photographs for the planning record regarding the one road in and out of the village, and my concerns about the suitability of these roads to withstand further traffic movements can be clearly seen from the images. So the photos referred to are western end of the village onto Streetley Lane, reflects the single vehicle carriageway width and its safety and congestion issues, and the second photo, the eastern end of the village at Tilden Road. The motorist view from the village approaching the blind humpback canal bridge taken from the opposite carriageway, as vehicles stationary at the junction are not visible when viewed from behind the same side of the carriageway. I therefore ask members of the Planning Committee to refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Second speaker tonight is Councillor Presley. Are you with us, Mr. Council President? I'm having trouble hearing, Councillor President. Mr. Lavender, did you know what's...
Give you a second, I will... I'm just going to try and invite him in. Councillor Presley, can you turn your microphone on, please?
Yes, I'm on, Chairman.
Sorry, Mr. Jackson, can you turn the feed that you've got if you're on it at the same time? It's just we're getting a bit of a overlap.
Sorry, is that all right?
That's fine now. Yeah,
that's great.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Presley, you have 3 minutes to speak. This will be timed and you will have a 30-second reminder when your time is nearing completion. So when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair and members of the Planning Committee, thanks for letting me speak about this application for 127 dwellings in the small village of Rhodesia, which has only one shop, the post office. This application seeks to use Cecil Close, a small cul-de-sac of Queen Elizabeth Close, for all the construction traffic. The committee saw this cul-de-sac on a previous site visit, so they are aware of how narrow this road is. The residents of Cecil Close will have to endure the noise, dust and heavy goods vehicles for the construction of 120 dwellings, which could take years to complete. Parking of the residents' vehicles will be horrendous because the construction traffic will block their drives and children will be in danger of the HGVs delivering on this site. The construction traffic will all have to use the road past the primary school and the children's centre, which weren't mentioned by the planning officer, causing difficulties for the parents and children who use these facilities. Again, the planning committee saw this on a previous site visit. This application will increase the size of Rhodesia by 1/3 without any new investment infrastructure for the village. No new shops or any other facilities for the residents of Rhodesia. Rhodesia has only one shop, which is the post office, and this application will only bring more houses, nothing for the residents, only houses, roads and cars. No green agenda here. Another further dwellings are not needed because Basildon has 10 years supply of housing, which fulfills the government policy. Highways say that a connection
30 seconds.
to Mary Street would be beneficial, but also say the turning stress will be needed to accommodate the traffic for the during of this connection. Because Cecil Close would have to be up to 250 cars using this for access to 127 dwellings. The increased traffic, the lack of infrastructure and no new facility for the village give the committee sound reason to refuse this application as they did before. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Councillor Presley. So, the third speaker tonight is on behalf of the developer, and it's Mr. Matt Jackson. Are you with us, Mr. Jackson?
Mr. Jackson, can you unmute your microphone, please? We seem to have lost Mr. Jackson, so I'm going to try and get him back.
Okay, fine. So we'll give you a few minutes to do that.
I'm still trying to get him, so bear with me a second.
Whilst we're waiting, could I ask if John could show me a couple of pictures?
Well, could we not do that, please, Councillor? Let's, yeah. Well, you know you have time to raise those in due course.
I've still been unable to get been able to get Mr. Jackson. So how do you wish to proceed if I keep trying?
What I will do is adjourn the meeting for, so we say 5 minutes.
Yeah.
If I make it 2 minutes past 7, so shall we say at 7 minutes past 7, we will reconvene, hopefully with Mr. Jackson. And if not,
Can you hear me now? Sorry. Hello.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Sorry about that.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. Jackson.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm having trouble with my camera, so I'll just have to speak to you if that's okay.
Yes. You've also got trouble with your mic. It's crackling.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's not 100%.
Shall I try and talk?
Well, hang on. Mr. Lavender, have you got any advice to offer Mr. Jackson on how to improve his sound?
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
No, no change.
Oh. Hello, can you hear me now?
No. Okay.
So I'm trying to talk. I'm trying to talk and see if you catch me just of what I'm saying.
Well, You sound like a Dalek, I'm afraid. That's the closest I can describe it as. I just wonder if we adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes and you can have a play around with your sound system, and perhaps Mr. Lavender can also speak to you to see if there's any things we can do our end. So it is now 4 minutes past. I will reconvene at 7:10. Okay, thank you. Okay, good evening again, everyone. This session of the Planning Committee is reconvened. I should explain that we've been unable to fix the sound system of Mr. Jackson. So what he's done in the interim is emailed his speech to Mr. Crozak, and when Mr. Crozak's ready, he will read it out. It needs to be timed, Mr. Wormald. So again, the 3-minute time will be operational. Okay, so when you're ready, John.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, my name is Matt Jackson and I am Land Director for Gleeson Regeneration. The application before you was previously refused, and unfortunately we were unable to attend that committee due to the COVID pandemic situation and lockdown that ensued around that time. We have subsequently resubmitted the application with additional information addressing the reasons for refusal. As a reminder of what Gleeson are all about, now we are back up and running at almost full capacity following the easing of lockdown measures. We specialise in the provision of entry-level housing aimed at first-time buyers, giving customers at the lower end of the housing market a chance to afford their first home. The proposal before you is for a development of 127 such homes. We take special care in ensuring selling prices are affordable to young first-time buyers. On this development, we intend to sell new houses with a starting price of around £120,000 for a 2-bedroom family home. When sold with Help to Buy, our 2 bedrooms at Queen Elizabeth Crescent would have a reduced initial mortgageable sum of £90,000, making it affordable to a working couple on the minimum wage. The weekly cost of this Help to Buy mortgage, based on a 2-year fixed rate product, would be in the region of just £70 per week, often much more affordable than renting even a local authority house. In the aftermath of the pandemic, Gleeson are determined to focus on selling to key workers who have done so much to help this country through the emergency. Since the beginning of May, Gleeson have offered key workers priority programme, including £1,000 off of free customer extras or 6 months mortgage paid up to the value of £2,000 and 48-hour priority in reserving plots prior to general public release, among other initiatives. It's our intention going forward to prioritise these people, and our hope is that 3/4 of our future sales are to such key workers. It has to be said that historically around 2/3 of Gleeson's customers would have been from this group in any case. Gleeson will also roll out our Community Matters programme on this site, covering a number of things from apprenticeships to sponsorship of local junior sports teams. I'm also pleased to confirm that Gleeson do not and will not sell homes to landlords or subletters, ensuring that our homes are only sold to those who actually need them.
30 seconds.
The development at Queen Elizabeth Crescent in Rhodesia is for 127 plots and will see an investment of around 10.1 million by Gleeson. Experiences tells us that around 1/3 of this will be spent on wages, either directly employed labour or indirectly via suppliers, subcontractors, etc., with a large proportion of this being within the local economy. One of the areas of concern when the application was previously heard was the impact of construction traffic on the immediate area. In this regard, we're happy to provide a detailed construction management plan.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, we managed to get Mr. Jackson's contribution eventually. So thank you for making that happen, Mr. Lavender. Right. We will now go around the members. As previously, we will go round 3 times. There will be 2 sets. There'll be 2 opportunities to ask a question and a supplementary, and then the final round is for people to make any final comment should they wish. Okay, I'll start with Councillor Brand.
Thank you, Chair. My question is it possible to repeat what Mr. Krawczak said about something to do with the Diocese of Sutherland, Nottingham, but I couldn't quite hear it all in relation to the primary school. Could he repeat that and explain it? Thank you.
Mr. Krawczak.
Thank you. Yes, so the Diocese of Southall and Nottingham trustees are now running Hagenfield School, for want of a better term. They sent over a late objection to the proposal that I received on Monday from the case officer. So they've raised concerns that the County Council have not requested any contributions toward education provision, and that's mainly because education contributions were requested previously. So when you recall, the application was refused in April. The County Council did request a contribution then, and they've also requested contributions from other schemes in the area. So that includes the development of 111 dwellings on Tilden Road, and also the Dormer Tool site that's on Shire Oaks Road. So that they've basically raised some concerns about the standard of the school. So they've commented that the classrooms are of a substandard size, and that there are also toilet facilities that don't comply with the guidance from the DFE. So they're saying that the school does require improvements, and they're working to do that. But they're looking to engage with the County Council, but they feel that the County Council's position isn't justified, and they haven't been acceptably engaged with in coming to that conclusion.
Okay, Councillor Brand, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, well, the supplementary is in the light of this. How does this application proceed? How are we as members supposed to deal with it?
I've pushed the County Council on this matter. I've sent them over the comments from the diocese and the trustees. The response I've received today from the County Council, and I'll read this directly. So their response is Nottinghamshire County Council pupil projections are refreshed annually. So this is why they're now not requesting a education contribution, but did previously. So their projections are refreshed annually. The request for contributions provided in relation to the original application in August of 2019 was based on last year's projections. The County Council can confirm that based on the current pupil projections, the existing net capacity at Hagenfields Primary does not support a developer contribution. However, the school are currently reviewing their accommodation, and subject to the outcome of that review, the requirement for a developer contribution may change. So at this moment in time, the County Council is stating that there is no contribution required.
Okay. Right, thank you. Councillor Charlesworth, do you have any questions at this stage?
No, my questions were regarding the school, and Councillor Brand covered that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding, do you have questions?
I find it extraordinarily perplexing over this education contribution that in April the numbers stacked up that there was need of a contribution, yet regardless of how many houses have been built subsequently across, because the education authority considers Worksop as a whole, and we know the amount of housing that's been built across Worksop at this present time, and the two villages of Shire Oaks and Rhodesia. that they then somehow deem that there isn't the need for an education contribution in Rhodesia. I am absolutely mystified about it. I too have had the missive from county, and the rider on that from an officer of the county council was that it left it open-ended. I don't understand how that can be open-ended. If tonight we grant it, this wouldn't have an education contribution for Haggenfields, it's just I find it unbelievable, really, and that you've got the Academy Matt Trust from the diocese having a totally different view on it. As I say, I think that I'm just absolutely do not understand how they can come to this conclusion, the county.
Thank you. Mr. Krazak, I don't know if you can make any further comment at this stage.
In terms of the trust comments, I think they haven't specifically objected to the scheme or stated that the school does have insufficient capacity, because what they've said is the trust is checking at the moment with Nottinghamshire County Council the official capacity of the school building, as it holds documentation which indicates a capacity of 135 places and also 175 places, which is obviously causing some confusion. And then they say, for information, the current number on roll is 101 pupils. So obviously, since the determination, or since the county council made their comments in respect of the previous application, they've looked at our housing trajectory, which I understand was given to them in June. So between April and now, effectively, by our planning policy team, and they've looked at that housing growth trajectory and used that for their projections, and that they've concluded that this school does have sufficient capacity to accommodate the pupils that are to be generated by this development.
Thank you. Can I just clarify one thing? Suppose we were to vote this through tonight. The 106 agreement would then be negotiated, would it not? And if the county council did accept that the diocesan figures were correct and a contribution was needed to expand the school from this site, could that then be included in the negotiations and passed into the eventual agreement that's signed?
No, we're obviously basing our decision on the requirements of the consultees at the moment. The county council is the local education authority, and yeah, we've made a recommendation based on the fact that there is no education contribution required. So yeah, we're making a decision on that, and we've got to remember that the SIL regulations state that planning obligations must be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So at this moment, if we can't demonstrate that those contributions are required to mitigate the impact of this development, and there's no evidence being put forward by the local education authority, then it'd be very unreasonable to ask for a contribution. And to grant planning permission with an open-ended Section 106 wouldn't give the developers any surety in developing their sites going forward. So they could get a planning permission and they feel they can develop the site viably, then they could be hit with maybe a contribution of upwards of £250,000 going forward, and obviously that can affect development viability and may affect our decision making going forward. So we have to base our decision on the local education authorities' comments at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Fielden, I jumped the gun. I didn't offer you a supplementary.
No, I mean, what you said was what I wanted clarifying, Chair. That it's what we've got in front of us. As I say, even though, as I say, we've evidently got the diocesan Matt does not agree with the County Council on this issue.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, do you have any questions at this time?
No, I just agree with the last three speakers. I think it's diabolical, but if I think of it.
Capacity with improvements to the building. Now, as chairman of AMAT, being involved in taking over both primary and secondary schools, where I've been in negotiations with county and the department, it is for the county council and the Department of Education through the schools commissioner, etc., to mediate on these issues. And it may be that the county council has not properly maintained and improved the buildings over the course of their tenure. And I've just finished negotiating on a similar issue, and it really is not a developer's responsibility to improve existing school buildings. So I think we're being sold a red herring on this one. But the development itself, if it's all affordable housing, and the words of the developer were, I think these are properties that we're short of in the district. So that's just an observation.
Thank you. Mr. Kralak, I don't think there's a direct question, but do you have any comments to make?
No, just probably one more point on the education side of things. I know the application was refused by members in April, but it should probably be noted that at that time the developer was more than happy to pay the education contribution when it was requested by the county council. So yeah, it's no longer being requested. So obviously the developer's not going to pay that, but they are paying additional contributions to the Wildlife Trust, for example, for ecological enhancements that aren't actually required as part of planning policy, and that's been done on a voluntary basis by them. So obviously, yeah, there's a clear intention for them to pay their way and make any contributions necessary to mitigate the impact of the development.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, do you have any questions at this time?
Yes, please. Just a clarification, please, Chair. On page 36, the District Parks Development Officer. Would you mind clarifying, please, John? I get quite involved in the wording because the play equipment that is going to be a contribution, it does say would be seeking, and I'm just a bit concerned of the word should and would be seeking, and the 10 years to spend the money upon receipt. Would you just clarify that for me, please, John?
I'm just going to read the precise wording of that, Councillor Richardson. Well, I mean, the developer has agreed to pay that contribution, so I do appreciate your concerns regarding that wording, but we are seeking a contribution of almost £48,000 toward the provision of newer play equipment and improvements. So we are seeking that contribution. The developer's willing to pay that for a Section 106 agreement. In terms of the 10 years to spend the money upon receipt, Section 106 agreements generally have a refund clause built in. So the standard would be generally 5 years. So if any money isn't spent or allocated for spending in 5 years, that money has to be returned to the developer. That's a standard clause that's inserted into such agreements. But obviously in this instance, the Parks team are requesting a 10-year clause to be inserted into that agreement.
Any comeback, Councillor?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Sanders.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, and just for members' information, when this application came before committee on the 1st of April, there was a 106 agreement in place for £219,596 for 13 primary school places. That was in April. Can I just ask officers, when was the date that the county council did the recalculation for primary school places? Because we had an application come before us for 27 houses in June, and as part of that application they were still saying that there were insufficient primary school places within the area covered. So I'd be interested to know what date they did the recalculation.
I can't answer that precisely, Councillor Sanders. All I can advise is that between April and now, so we provided the county council with our housing trajectory, showing housing growth across the district, which obviously enables them to calculate their education capacity projections. So that was provided to the county council in June, so last month. So that has enabled them to obviously calculate their figures going forward. When that calculation was undertaken, I can't advise the precise date of that, but we have challenged the county council on this matter quite strongly, because as officers we were concerned that there was a fairly substantial change in position, and we wanted to make sure that was right. But the local education authority are responsible for ensuring there's sufficient capacity in schools, and for ensuring that developments mitigate their impact by providing Section 106 obligations. As I stated earlier, there are tests that obligations have to meet, and if the county council are saying there isn't an obligation required in this instance, we couldn't possibly ask for one because it would be unlawful.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders, do you want to come back?
More of an observation than a question, Chair, because it does slightly concern me when I looked at the report and I did compare the two, that the actual requirement of secondary school places has not changed. So in April we were asking for 20, and in today's application we're asking for 20. So I find it incredible that the primary school provision hasn't changed, yet the primary has, and especially with the amount of development that is taking place in the area, I cannot for the life of me see how all of a sudden we've a surplus of primary school places in Worksop. And the other thing that does concern me is the county council has not even had the common decency to speak to the people that run the school.
Okay. Yeah, that was a comment rather than a question. So thank you for that. Councillor Schuller, do you have any questions?
Yes, please. I've got. I'm looking at page 42 in the paragraph directly under the table, and it says the applicant submitted transport statement demonstrating that there's no evidence to suggest that a proposed development will give rise to a severe traffic impact. However, it then goes on to say that county council have commented that the traffic impact would be significant. So are we saying it's significant, or are we saying that there is no impact?
Mr. Krozak.
Inevitably, a development of this size is going to have some impact. So there's two arms to the county council in terms of highways. So strategic highways have a look at the wider highway network. And they work with Highways Development Control, who generally comment on our planning applications. So the strategic highways team have a look at the wider network and identify any improvements that are required cumulatively from all the developments taking place in an area, and the growth that would be taking place across the district and the impact that has on the highway infrastructure. So they obviously work very closely with us on our community infrastructure levy requirements and the improvements required there. So they've commented, they're obviously aware that there's several other developments taking place in the vicinity and within Worksop, and they feel that it would have a significant impact cumulatively on certain junctions, but they haven't objected to the scheme. So it would have to be a severe impact, but their comments are that this would be, all these impacts would be mitigated by community infrastructure levy improvements on the roundabouts, and they're already identified on the list, or infrastructure list. So the development control team at the county council as a highway authority, they assess the transport assessment. So the scope of the transport assessment is agreed with the highway authority. So they assess the impact on identified junctions, but they have agreed that scope. So they have looked in detail at the figures provided by the applicant in their transport assessment, and they feel that the transport assessment is robust, so haven't raised any concerns. So in terms of the transport assessment, it's identified that cumulatively by 2024, the Sandy Lane A57 roundabout would be over capacity slightly in the PM peak, but that would be with or without this development, and the development would have a very, very limited impact upon that roundabout. So that's all evidenced within that assessment, and the highway authority have agreed with that. But obviously there will be further improvements coming forward through the SIL, the community infrastructure levy receipts that we receive.
Thank you. Councillor Shudder, do you want to come back?
Yes, please. So the access road, the Cecil Close, the cul-de-sac that they're accessing via to the site, has that been part of the assessment, and we think that that's a viable access route for upwards of 254 vehicles and construction vehicles?
Well, there'd be 2 points of access, because the applicants obviously offered to make up the road from Mary Street as well, or provide a contribution toward that. So in terms of routing of construction traffic, that hasn't been agreed. So condition 14 is looking at details of routing of construction traffic, because it may not be appropriate to take construction traffic along Cecil Close. Obviously it depends on the availability of that road, residents, parking, etc. So we may consider it more appropriate to take construction traffic into the site the other way. Obviously these are residential estate roads. It's effectively a residential form extension, so there is going to be some impact on the existing road network, but building dwellings in sustainable locations adjacent to the existing settlement inevitably will do, and we need to mitigate that the best we can and make sure construction traffic is routed in the most appropriate places.
So Mary Street and Cecil Close will be available at the outset of construction?
Potentially, yes. We'll need to consider those. Condition 14 sets out the requirements for construction management. So we need to assess the details submitted by the developer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tomlinson, do you have any questions?
Councillor Tomlinson, can you unmute your microphone, please? Councillor Tomlinson, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I had a bit of microphone trouble there. I think with listening to the debate, I haven't got so much question, more observation. The type of housing that's proposed here, yes, is very attractive. There's a big demand for it. But I think the infrastructure of the area needs to be improved as well, particularly circumstances connected with the school and the parking outside the school and people attending school while the construction is going on. It could be, I'm not saying it will be, it could be a nightmare. But also I think the complete indifference, which is what I'm getting from the County Council's highways, is something that we should address before anything else, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Krozak, is there anything you wanted to say to that?
We've probably addressed most of those points. I mean, the County Council have carefully assessed this scheme, and I'd probably defend them in this instance, and I wouldn't say they're indifferent to developments. Obviously, they do object where developments have an impact upon highway safety, and we see a lot of developments as officers where developers have to provide an awful lot of detail or amendments to satisfy the highway authority, and then members, we present them to members, and we're saying the highway authority haven't got any objections, but a lot of work has gone into a proposal prior to us presenting that in most cases. So it has been carefully assessed. We are very wary about the location of the school, but as I've already stated, the development of housing in sustainable locations in urban areas at the edge of the existing urban form will have an impact on existing land users and near surrounding residents, and it's our job to try and mitigate that. But development in these areas is generally the most appropriate places. Obviously, developing in the middle of the countryside would have a lesser impact on existing residents, but would then erode the countryside. So we obviously have to try and mitigate these impacts the best we can using the tools at our disposal.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a question. I think this is a very attractive site, really. I like the idea of the affordable houses thing, and certainly we don't see many new developments that offer smaller units for first-time buyers. And there's also a great site on the edge of the countryside. You know, you can walk for miles in the fields behind, and also there are 5 industrial estates within 3 miles, so there should be plenty of work around, and two huge supermarkets, which again provide work and also shopping. But there are some concerns I have, and I would like to come back to the Mary Street connection. If I've read the highways report correctly, the £75,000 will pay for the construction costs of the road, of the link, but that still leaves the cost of the land up in the air, doesn't it? Well, that's how I read it. So have you got any information, Mr. Krozak, on land ownership and whether that is available for the link to be built?
Yeah, it's probably better if I initially, I try and pull back up the PowerPoint presentation that I seem to have lost. Obviously, the developer is. Can everybody see that again? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the area in question. to the right hand side of the screen. So that site has planning permission for 9 dwellings.
Yeah.
As part of that permission, that developer is required to set out this highway, and that is to access that development. So they need to make up an adoptable highway to access onto the southern side of Mary Street. It's my understanding there's discussions ongoing between the two site owners, so the potential developer of this site and the site owner of this site, the smaller site of 9 dwellings. So obviously what the developer here is proposing on doing is effectively making up the access road for that developer free of charge. So that takes that liability away from that developer, and effectively commences their planning permission. Obviously, land ownership isn't a material planning consideration, but the fact is this developer here is proposing to facilitate that access. So whilst, yes, there are going to be agreements that will have to be put in place legally, we're confident that a Section 106 agreement would bind the land and ensure that the developer, the applicant to this scheme, would have to deliver that.
Thank you. So my supplementary would be, just to clarify, if the two developers reach agreement, there is no third-party landowner who also has to reach agreement.
It's my understanding that the land so there's land that effectively appears between the main body of this application site where you can see the dwellings being built. Yeah. So there's that strip of land there. That's my understanding that's owned by Bassetlaw District Council. So obviously there would have to be a process to go through to sell and dispose of that land. But again, I'd just reiterate that the developers served notice as part of this planning application and included that within their application site. So as part of the planning process, we can't consider land ownership as being a material consideration.
Okay, perhaps I'll come back to that later. But we'll go around again in case people want to ask any further questions. And perhaps if you could indicate whether you want to be asked the third time as well. Okay, Councillor Brand.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to this school issue that I first asked about and others have explored. I don't have a vast knowledge of local schools, but I can't think of any school that isn't having to review the space available, the classroom sizes, the corridor sizes as a result of COVID. The representative of the developer talked about the issues relating to coronavirus and they impact upon schools. So I would like to see this issue sorted out between the County Council and the trustees beforehand. The second point I want to make is that the access at Cecil Close and Mary Road, if I've got the name, Mary Street. I don't live there, but I could live with it during construction phase. But I still think these are very small roads, very narrow roads for access when the whole lot is built, you know, with 200 and something vehicles going to and fro. You mentioned, John, that the site to the east of the 9 dwellings, if some sort of arrangement could be reached between the two developers, you could take a road out right through that alongside the industrial estate to the A57. And I would have liked to have seen some alternative issue, because the developer knew that we had concerns about Cecil Close and Mary Street when this was considered on the 1st of April. My third point is that on page 39 are listed the 3 dimensions for sustainable development: economic, social and environmental. And I can't see that this development meets those objectives. I have to say, like Councillor Pidwell, I actually don't mind the development itself. I think it's quite a good development alongside existing estate, but I'm very concerned about the access issue down those narrow roads of Cecil Close and Mary Street. So I think I've said my bit, and I don't need to come back for a third round.
Thank you. Mr. Krazak, is there any comment on that or no?
Just in terms of the access into the site, yes, these are estate roads. Fully acknowledge that, but speeds are low along these roads. They're obviously serving dwellings, the school. There's a park in fairly close proximity to the site, so that they're well used by pedestrians. And generally on these types of residential roads, vehicular speeds are very, very low. So in terms of means of access, the roads are adopted. They're of a standard width, and they provide a suitable means of access into the site. On the face of it, yes, 127 dwellings does seem a high number, but the reality is there wouldn't be a huge amount of traffic generated on an hourly basis by the development. And again, vehicular speeds would be very low, and the Highway Authority have assessed the scheme. The transport assessment that's been submitted has looked at the whole highway network leading to the site, and there haven't been any concerns raised. So from a highway safety perspective, there isn't any evidence to refuse planning permission. And if there had been concerns raised by the Highway Authority in terms of substandard access roads, we certainly wouldn't be making this recommendation at this point. In terms of the school provision, obviously, the county council are looking at the capacity of the school. In terms of the COVID situation, yeah, a lot of schools are having to reassess their accommodation and what they're doing going forward. But obviously, that's very fluid at the moment and active. So, yeah, we probably couldn't ask for this development to fund the necessary improvements for that, because we don't really know how that's going to pan out in the future. So we're looking at capacity, and given the county council's comments, there's the local education authority. We can't ask for that contribution, but it's obviously between the school and the county council to ensure that any improvements are made in terms of the toilet facilities and classroom sizes, etc., to ensure that the school meets the required standards.
Thank you. Could I just have an indication from someone? Can they hear a helicopter in the background to me?
Yes, it's over the top of our estate, David. I've just had to shut my doors.
Yeah.
And windows.
No, but can anyone hear it on the feed?
Pardon?
Can anyone hear it over the feed? No.
No, I've just shut all the doors and windows. I think you could have heard it off mine, David.
Okay. Councillor Charlesworth, do you have any questions or further comments?
Yeah, I do. I've got concerns over the school and the county council, and I'd like to see that settled before this development goes ahead. I've also got concerns over, you mentioned about the roundabout on Sandy Lane, about the amount of traffic. They are building a bit further down the A57 on that wasteland. I don't know off the top of my head how many houses they're building there, but obviously it's going to be coming up the A57. So is that not going to impact on the A57 Sandy Lane roundabout as well? You know, that's one of my concerns, and the narrowness of the streets. When I first went down to look at the site, there were a number of school kids coming out. You commented over there's a speed restriction on the streets, on the road, which is fine. Don't mean to say every driver sticks to them restrictions, and I'm concerned over that. I'd like to see something in place with that. I like the development. I think there's a need for that type of housing. It's just the whole infrastructure that's just not sitting right with me at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Crowther, any feedback on that or not?
I mean, just to reiterate, the local education authority, they've made their comments. So, yeah, they've looked at capacity, and there are obviously issues for the two parties to resolve, but we can't not determine planning applications waiting for parties to resolve their issues. If there's a capacity issue at the school, at the end of the day, the local education authority are responsible for ensuring there is sufficient capacity. So the county council will have to fund that. But that's the bottom line. And I'd probably come back to, I do appreciate that, yes, these roads serve a residential area. They are narrow residential roads, but they're at an adoptable standard. We can't mitigate for people breaking the law. That's obviously for the police to enforce, but all the highway guidance states that where the character of an area is residential, there are pedestrians and parked cars. Manual for streets, which is government guidance, does make it clear that vehicular speeds are generally lower, and the highway authority haven't raised concerns about the access roads serving this site. So again, as officers, we don't feel there's any evidence to refuse permission on those grounds.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding.
Condition 14 looks at the construction during construction, and would it be possible when it gets, if this were granted, would it be possible to if there was going to be deliveries that went past the school, ensure that it wasn't done when we'd got school coming in and school coming out? As I say, I'm very mindful of how narrow things are, and of the traffic calming measures they've got on that side of Rhodesia. But it's ensuring that should it be granted, we don't have construction traffic going delivering at a time when we've got children coming in and out of school.
Yeah, Mr. Crowther.
Yeah, I think that was one of the aims of that condition. So we'd want a very detailed construction management plan from the developer should this permission get approved. Yeah, we're very, very wary of the proximity of the school to the site. Obviously, there'll be a lot of pedestrians visiting the school from the surrounding area, so I think that'd be perfectly reasonable to ensure that was built into any plan.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
I have no comments at the moment, and I'm all right with it. Thank you.
Okay, so I take it from that you don't want to come back for the third round. Councillor Roxby, any questions, comments?
No, thank you, Chairman. I've no points, and I've no wish to come back later on. Every point for me, Chairman, has been more than adequately responded to on more than one occasion. I'm quite happy. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Quigley.
No, I don't want to come back.
Pardon? Thank you, Chair. Really, just to reiterate, we shouldn't confuse improvements to a school building with capacity. And if the county council have said there's capacity, we can't make a decision that goes against that, because legally we won't be able to enforce it. The issue about the width of the roads and so on, I think if members of this committee remember, we've had at least two similar issues in Retford developments where the access was even worse than this, where we got a narrow road and then an immediate right angle left hand turn into a field, and that was our main objection, and we lost it on appeal because the Highways Authority said the roads were of sufficient width. So I think we're on a hiding to nothing with that one as well. But that again, that's I'm just expressing my opinion.
Okay, would you want to come back to express your opinion a third time?
No, I think I've expressed my opinion enough, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Richardson, now the back to John.
Yes, thank you. I've had to shut the doors. You couldn't hear a thing. I totally agree with what Councillor Quigley said. Yes, I think if we do refuse, then it will go to appeal, and then we've lost again with the road situation. We have to agree with what the Highways and Education at this time state. So that's my comment, Chairman. I don't wish to speak again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Chair. A question, if I may. In the original application that came forward on the 1st of April, there was a request made for £90,000 to fund capacity improvements to the local transport, and also for the provision of a new bus stop. I note that it's not requested in this pack. Could I ask why that is?
Yeah, Mr. Crozat.
Again, the county council have been and challenged on that one, and we've been led to believe that those improvements are now being funded from elsewhere. We've not been provided with the exact details, but I think there was an element of double counting from another scheme. But the county council have advised that they have funding for those from elsewhere. So they're not requesting any further improvements from this scheme.
Okay. Do you want to come back, Councillor?
If I may, Chair, just a quick question about the Tilden Road, Shire Oaks Road junction, which is basically the main way out of the village. Has there been any study done on that particular junction, John? Because not only have you got this development and the Tilden Road development, which is about 238 houses, you've also got just down to the right of you, as you're turning out of Rhodesia, you've got the Dormer Wood development, which is a further 98 houses. And you've also got on the corner the development that's been there for a while at Wood End. So there are kind of going to be 4 developments feeding into that junction. Is there any study being done on it?
Yeah, so the transport assessment does take account of junctions in the vicinity of the site and all other committed developments. So they're developments that are under construction and developments that already have planning permission. So if that junction had been identified as being either dangerous or of an insufficient standard to take this development traffic and all the other developments cumulatively, we would have been able to justify taking Section 106 obligation contributions for the improvement of that junction. But because that hasn't been identified as having any shortcomings, we can't justify taking any obligations to improve that.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, My main question, and we're back to education, John, really sorry, but as we've got this disconnect between these 13 primary places that were required in April, and suddenly we don't need these primary places, is there any process by which we can delay a decision on this application? Why there seems to be no communication between the trust, was it the Southwell Diocese and Notts Trust that run the primary school, and the county council, who suddenly seem to think that the 13 places are there, and again it concerns me that county council don't seem to know whether they need 135 places in. There's 135 places in that school, or 175, and that they've got 101 children in that school, and we're talking about another 127 houses here, and what about 246 in the very close vicinity, plus one other development that Councillor Sanders just mentioned. So I think in terms of that, I just wonder if there's any process by which we can delay a decision and then bring this back for a later decision when we've got very, very clear numbers from County Council.
Sorry, Chairman.
Well, I was just going to say, we can always adjourn, can't we, until a later date, should the committee wish. Is that what you were going to say?
Yes. I mean, I'll answer the question honestly. It's a decision for members. If you feel like you can't determine this application at the moment for that reason, you are able to defer the application. My concern would be that the developer has the right to appeal non-determination of an application. So it's not just a refusal of planning permission. They can appeal non-determination. And if the council is seen, we'd need strong reasons to defer, because if we're seen to be dragging our heels, so to speak, to potentially get an extra contribution from a developer when we've been advised by the consultee it's not required, it could be grounds for costs. But it's a decision for members, and we don't know how long the county council and the school will take to come to an agreement. But the school haven't commented that there is a lack of capacity. They've just, their objections are largely around the condition of the school and the actual quality of the facilities, which may need some improvement.
Okay.
So in actual fact, we do have this disparity of figures. We've got counties saying that they think that there's 135 or 175 places, and that there are only 101 children in that school. And then we have developments all the way around that school that are adding up to quite a substantial increase of children that would need to use the school. So it just, I mean, I'll sort of defer to my colleagues on what their thoughts are about just a potential, and it's not a delay to get money for the school. It's delaying for us to understand this more readily.
We are getting ahead of ourselves here. I think you are proposing that we defer this on the basis that we want more discussion between the diocesan, between the academy and Notts County Council on school places numbers. Does that have a seconder to propose that we defer? Anyone like to come in if they do?
Yes, I second it.
Okay. My view is that we have talked about this sufficiently to equip members to have a view on whether they want to defer to get to the bottom of this capacity, or whether they are sufficiently informed enough to make a decision tonight. So I will go round in turn, and we are voting whether you want to adjourn and defer this meeting or this decision or not. Okay, Councillor Brand.
Defer.
Councillor Charlesworth.
Not.
Councillor Fielding.
Not.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Not.
Councillor Oxby.
Thank you. Not.
Thank you. Councillor Quigley.
Not.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Not.
Councillor Sanders.
Not, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
Defer.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson.
Councillor Tomlinson, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Easier said than done, James. Thank you, Chairman. Not. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm a not as well. So the proposal to defer is lost. So we will carry on discussing this. We were with Councillor Schiller. Did you have any other comments to make, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson, I hope you got your mic still on. Have you got any further comments to make?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nothing to add, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I haven't got any comments at this stage. There were a few people who didn't indicate that they didn't want to make a third contribution, so I will approach those in turn. Councillor Fielding, did you want to make any more comments?
No, I think I've said all I need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders, any further comments from yourself?
Thanks, Chair. No, I don't think there's anything else I'd like to add.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Tomlinson.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so people have had an opportunity to ask questions and to make comment, and I'll try and sum up what is a very difficult, in my view, a very difficult decision to make. The advice of the planning officer, and we should start with that, is to grant planning permission for this site on the basis that the identified benefits of this scheme outweigh the identified harm of this scheme. And again, it is important to make the point that schemes can be harmful, but if the benefits outweigh, then permission can be granted. We've heard a number of those harms voiced tonight, including the increased traffic, particularly around Cecil Street and the immediate estate roads there, and to an extent on the A57 Sandy Lane roundabout. We've also heard a lot about disturbance during construction. particularly with traffic passing through or passing near to the school. And we've also heard that there's only one shop in the village, and so there is a paucity of facilities for the new homeowners. And I think there's also the issue still about the connection with Mary Street. Seems to be not tied down really. So they're the sort of harms that I think we've heard about. The benefits of the scheme are outlined on pages 46 and 47, and they include that the occupants of the houses will be a market to sustain local businesses and existing businesses, as well as enabling occupants of the houses to make a contribution to the wider economy and the social activity of the area. And perhaps that's particularly important if Gleeson's or the developer stick to their promises to to give market inducements for key workers to buy their houses. There is a contribution towards some minor infrastructure improvements, but as 2 or 3 councillors have pointed out, that is a substantially less costly contribution from the developer than was previously the case with the earlier application. But we have to balance that, and as a couple of people have pointed out, the word unlawful has been cited tonight, and that of course is quite a strong word. As I understand it, planning regulations, planning law stipulate the 106 agreements have to be relevant to the site in question. And our planners have gone on the information provided by the county. At the moment, the Haggenfield School is not over capacity. That is a hard pill to swallow. We've been here before with other applications. There was one at Langold, one at Colton, I remember in detail, where the county council said the schools were not at capacity. But that's what we've been told, and I think we have to respect that. And it's also disappointing that in passing at the £90,000 for bus improvements has been dropped from the latest application. I think we also have to bear in mind the nature of these houses. I think that's quite a telling point, really, that 2 and 3 bedroom houses are seldom built by developers on any great scale. And we railed in the past about the huge numbers of 4 bedroom houses. And if I remember correctly, there's only about 14 or 15 planned on this site. And just a final word about traffic. As has been pointed out, the county council are content with this development. They've assessed the estate roads and they say that they are wide enough, they meet the current regulations. There are traffic calming facilities in place. The road does narrow quite frequently where traffic has to give way. And of course, past the school is a 20-mile-an-hour limit. Now, why on earth a local person, probably with a kid at the school, would want to go past deliberately at speed, I don't get that. Surely most drivers respect that. I'm sure all of us who drive around this committee respect it, and the vast majority of drivers would. One final point about the junction at Tilden Road and Shire Oaks Road. I know the issues about that capacity has arisen. According to the transport assessment commissioned by the developer, at the peak hour, there would be an additional 47 cars going out. and 17, I think, or 15 coming the other way into the estate. So if you've got 47 cars going one way, that's one every minute and 20 seconds. And does that make that a severe change to the existing traffic? Perhaps that's why the County Council talked about it being a significant, which I take to mean less than severe. So that is I think they are the issues. My apologies if I've missed any out, but on that basis, we will go round and take the vote. Starting with Councillor Brand.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Charlesworth.
Grant.
So is that Grant?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Oxby.
Thank you. Against.
Thank you. Councillor Quigley.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Sorry, Chairman, for.
Sanders.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Schuller.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson.
Against. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I vote for. So let's top that up. Okay, I make that 6 against and 5 in favour. Is that your understanding, Mr. Lavender? Yeah.
I make the same, yes, Chairman.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you. So that application is refused. Okay, so now we have to go around and list reasons for refusal, and for the benefit of the public, what we do this because we have to issue a decision notice to the developer, and the decision notice has to have the reasons why we took the action that we did. And what we do tonight is we ascertain the reasons that influence members to vote against, and that will then be the final wording of the decision notice will be agreed at a forthcoming planning consultation group meeting. So I will go around and invite those who voted against to explore their reasons, starting with Councillor Brand.
Thank you, Chair. I voted against for 3 reasons. One is the lack of clarity and uncertainty around the school situation. The second reason is what I consider to be the very narrow access via Cecil Close and Mary Street. And thirdly, although, as I said, I like the site itself, the lack of exploring any other access on the part of the developer, who knew that we had issues with Cecil Close and Mary Street last time round. So those are the 3 reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding.
I concur with Councillor Brand over the lack of clarity to do with the school, and I certainly couldn't make out what I'd received from County this afternoon, which when they were referring to 106, which the planning officer read out, and again it's the narrow access of Cecil Close and as to when you'd get the other access from Mary Street. It's not detailed as to when that would happen.
Thank you. And Councillor Oxby.
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing to add to what's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
I concur with what's already been said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
I just reiterate everything that's already been said and concur. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I concur with all that's been said, but must reiterate there is a very grey area around what the pretensions for the school are, and of course the very narrow roads would constitute a road safety hazard in my view. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Krozak, I think there are three main reasons that I wrote down. Does that give you enough to work with? Do you want to come back on any of those?
No, I think that's sufficient clarity. I'd probably just reiterate to members we haven't received any objections from statutory consultees. So to evidence these reasons that appeal may prove to be difficult and could potentially leave us open to costs, but obviously it's a decision for members, and we can draft the reasons for refusal for agreement with the PCG meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, the final item on the agenda is any other business. There isn't any, so I'd like to thank you for your attendance and good evening to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Cast.